there's actually interesting machlekes what that means, that the sun is affected. Pashup says that it's like a solar eclipse, right? So the sun is not giving off light because the moon goes between the earth and the sun. But that's a natural event. So Yosef doesn't like that. He says it's a natural event, and you can actually predict it. It's right based on orbit. So he wants to say there's blotches on the sun, and therefore the sun is not able to give off light. So it's a machlekes if it's a solar eclipse or not. But anyway, it's a siman ra l'chol olam kula. It's a very bad siman for the entire world when the sun is not giving off light. Why? What is comparable to? The melech basav adam she'asa suda la'avodav. Right? He makes a suda for all his servants. And he puts this menorah, big candelabra with candles in front of them, and this way they have light. And then they sin. So what happens? He gets angry, and he says to his servant, take away the candelabra. In other words, take away the sun, take away the light, and let them live in darkness. So they just add to the much a little bit. Why does that say la'avdoi? Why didn't he just put out the light himself? So it's, in other words, because maybe you could say it's a raya that what he was doing, it's to the moon, right? Then he tells the moon to go between the sun and the earth to stop the sun's light from hitting the earth. So maybe that's taka like it is a solar eclipse. That's one raya that I want to say. It's a solar eclipse, and the moon and Hashem sends the moon to block the sun from reaching the earth, and therefore we lose our light. But it's a bad siman for the entire world. Tanya, so here's another shita when all the ma'iris are what? It's the moon, the sun, and the stars. So whenever the ma'iris are liken, whenever they are they're not able to give off light, they're affected or afflicted. Siman ralis and Yisrael. So the Gemara doesn't want to say Klal Yisrael, so it says let's say Ahem Shal Yisrael to the enemies of Yisrael. But it really means Klal Yisrael. We're just talking this lashon saginar in a nice way, but it's actually a bad siman for Klal Yisrael. Why is it a bad siman only for Klal Yisrael? Like you're saying, because Klal Yisrael is used to always getting punished, right? We have been persecuted, Holocaust, Tach V'Tach, Crusades, Chorban Beis HaMikdash. So we always get punished, and therefore, if there's something happening bad in the world, it's likely it's happening. We're gonna end up getting the brunt of this negative things that are happening in the world. Mashal, what's the mashal to? The sefer to a rebbe, right? Shabbos a sefer, right? Whenever my rebbe used to come to class, and he had a stick, right? Who gets angry? Who gets scared? Whoever guy used to get hit every day, right? He's the one that gets scared. Who died, right? He's the one that gets afraid. So if Hashem is bringing bad things to the world, right? If we're the ones that are constantly always getting punished, so likely that this is going to punish us as well. And therefore, when you see taka things happening in the world, Klal Yisrael better get scared. So like in the beginning, people say, it's in China. But no, if the things have been happening bad to the world, Klal Yisrael should know that it's very likely it's going to end up eventually in their backyard. Very scary, a very scary thing that it's taka very relevant to today. So then Tarabanan, another brisa. Bisman shachama, like, and again, all these things. The reason why the Gemara is talking about these things now is because we just spoke about how Geshamim is a klala on Sukkot, right? So now we're bringing other things that are actually bad. You see where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is angry with the world, with Klal Yisrael. Bisman shachama, like, when the sun gets afflicted, siman ra lo edek v'chavim. So it's a bad siman for goyim. So it's three shitas here. Like the first shita was when the cham is like it's bad for the entire world. The second shita is that it's when when all the ma'iris are like inside the sun, the moon, all the stars, it's bad for Klal Yisrael. And the third one is it depends. If it's the sun, so it's bad for Goyim. But if it's Milvan, if it's the moon, that's like siman ralis and name Shal Yisrael. It's only bad for Klal Yisrael. So for the sun, it's bad for Goyim. But the moon, it would be bad for Klal Yisrael, depending on which one gets afflicted. Why? Why is the moon? Maybe she
looked sick also. She said that she was sick for a week.
Joe, come on, Joe.
Yossel.
The Dolphins head coach is there.
I'm going to bench you.
Everybody. Mute everybody.
I can't. Manash has to mute everybody. Oh, somebody did it. So now I got to unmute myself. Hold on. No, I'm going to. Tova! How do I unmute myself?
Tova!
You're not muted. Oh, we hear you. We hear you.
I'm good. Okay. So we said, right, if the sun gets afflicted, it's bad for Goyim. This third shita, right? But if the moon gets afflicted, it's bad for Klal. So I initially saw Ma'ayin Levana, right? The Jews, we operate around a lunar calendar, and therefore so since we are totally on the moon, therefore if the moon is the one that's getting afflicted, it must be it's bad for the Jews. Mashenki, right? The Goyim, they use a solar calendar, And therefore, if it's the sun that's being afflicted, and that's the one that's not being able to give forth light, it's likely a bad simon only for the Goyim and not for Klal Yisrael. Now the Gemara continues. Like a Mizrach, when the sun is like a Mizrach, only on the east, in other words, in the place where it rises, right? So simon rali yeshli Mizrach. So if it's only not being able to give forth light when it rises in the east part, so that's going to be the place where they got to be afraid, because that's a bad sign for them. Let's say it's in the late afternoon where it's setting, and which is in the west, and that's when it's not giving forth light. So simon rali yeshli Ma'ariv, so then it's going to be a bad simon for those that live in that area in the west, because that's where the sun is being affected. But let's say it's in the middle of the day where the sun is giving light both equally to the east and to the west. So then simon rali chol kulai, it's this bad simon both for the west, east, north, south. It's basically a bad simon for all of the world, because at that point the sun really gives forth equally light to everyone. So that would be a very bad simon for everybody. Again, these are a continuation. Panav dam l'dam. So we're still talking about the sun now. Let's say the sun, it turns red, right? So that's how the sun looks. So cherev b'lo'olam. That means that there's going to be cherev, meaning I guess death, right? I think cherev means death, right? Anybody have, what does cherev mean? Anybody have an art scroll? Cherev b'lo'olam. Death? Hello?
Death by sword.
Yeah. Death by sword. Okay, so death by sword, yeah. So cherev b'lo'olam. The sack, if let's say it's black like a sack, right, which is like the, and he says over here, the feathers of a goat. So then it's chitei rav b'lo'olam. It's going to bring hunger, right? Because hunger, what happens when a person's very hungry? It blackens a person's face. So it's a simon. If the sun has a black-looking complexion, then it's going to bring what's likely coming to the world is going to be starvation. And if let's say it's got both some resemblance of red and black, so then you can be forewarned that cherev v'chitzei rav b'lo'olam, both death through sword and also chitzei rav, also starvation, is going to come to the world. So again, all these these frightening things. And by the way, he just says over here that the Maharsha writes is that why Taka, when we compare to a Talmud before, he says Hashem has it's Klal Yisrael is getting punished over here, is because he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a Talmud who has kishroinus, who has the ability to learn, that's the one who always gets punished. Right, so also, Hashem doesn't have tinus on the Goyim because they don't know how to learn Torah, but we do not learn Torah, so Hashem has tinus on us for not learning Torah. Fine. Anyway, continuing weiter. Let's say the sun, it's affected. It's afflicted immediately, not immediately, but actually upon setting. So so that's going to delay. That would be an indication that it's on a delay. Whatever bad things are going to happen, it's on a delay. Why? Because since HaKadosh Baruch Hu waited to affect the sun, right? Because the sun rose in the morning, right? Had a whole day where the sun was operating, beautifully, and then only at night, right before it set, it started, dimmed and no longer was giving forth light. So it shows that Hashem is like basically taking his time before he's going to actually bring this Piranius. But let's say if it's immediately upon rising in the morning, already the sun is not being able to give forth light. So then the Maharis Love, so then the Piranius is going to actually come right away. Just like the sun immediately upon rising is not able to give forth light, so too you can expect terrible things to happen immediately. Yesh Aimrim Chilaf Advarim, and some say exactly the opposite. And so Rashi says why? Because he says that if it happens in the night, right? So that means that Meharis Lavi. Why? Because the sun set right away. So since it's setting right away, so therefore the Piranius, you can expect the Piranius to happen right away. Why? And Rashi writes right? Just since the what's the sim? Just like there's no time for the sun.
Sruli. Joe, press mute on your phone.
Settle down.
Press mute on your phone.
At least show us what you're eating.
Somebody else's phone.
Show us what you're eating. We hear you.
Okay. Besides you. And we hear you chewing and swallowing.
Sruli, are we using Eretz Yisrael as the marker? Like it rises and sets everywhere?
No, I think wherever you are. So if it's
just
America,
your place.
huh?
Wherever you are, that's the.
Yeah, that's the marker. Wherever it is. I mean, wherever you are. I was, I guess Mizrach, wherever that is, in that place that sees it. I mean, it could be right. You're not going to see it in Eretz Yisrael. You can actually in other countries. The country that sees it likely is the one that's got to be afraid. But then the Jews in that country, right, should be even more afraid. But he said, interestingly, he says over here that just the second shot, like the Chiluf Advarim, right, is that right? So the first shot was that when it sets, right, so you can expect for the Puranis to be delayed. Here it's saying that when it sets, you can expect for the Puranis to actually come right away. Why? And Rashi Rashi, if you look like 1, 2, 3, 6 lines down in the wide lines, he says, right, this Puranis Maris Lave, the Puranis is going to happen right away. Why? Simin, Kishem She'en Le Sheyus L'Shemesh B'Yayim, just like there wasn't any time, right, for the sun by day. In other words, it got afflicted at night and then immediately it set. Right? There was no time for the sun to really like adapt, right? Right when it got afflicted, it set. So ain sheis l'parnis lavi. There's no time. In other words, the parnis is going to happen right away. There is no delay before the parnis is going to happen. Masha ain came Rashi's b'tziyasai in the morning, right? If let's say that the sun gets afflicted in the morning, right? B'tziyasai shachris puranis sheyelave. Why? Because Hashem is letting the sun hang out a whole day that way. Since there's more hours in the day for the sun to hang out, right? Because it's only in the morning, it only just rose. Even though it got afflicted in the morning, but since it's going to be out the whole day, so that's an indication that we still have some time before the Purani is going to happen, and I guess that gives us time to do tshuva. So it's just again a siman, but something that we should be cognizant of if we ever notice it. Anyway, fine. So and then the Gemara goes weiter that whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does punish other nations, she'ein elikeha like ima, it's God, and Rashi is not really God, but Rashi actually says the Sar. Rashi says the Malach that pleads on behalf of that nation. Rashi says, like for example, he says Smael, right, which is Sar Shel Esa. Rashi says Sarah Hamelitz Va'ada, the Sar, the Malach that is the Melitz, right, the one that always pleads on behalf of that nation. You're going Smael Shal is going to get smoked with it. Shenemar, like the pasuk says of Achol, it came Mitzrayim Esesh Shvatim. Right? Hashem, not only did Hashem punish Mitzrayim, but he punished all the gods of Mitzrayim, and obviously no such thing is gods, right? I mean, Hashem, what's a god? A god is nothing. So it must mean that it's not a god, but it's referring to the Malachim who are the defendants and who plead on behalf of those nations. But when Klal Yisrael, we do the Ratzon Shel Makayim, Ein Yisrael Mikol Elu. We don't have to worry about anything. So in other words, if all these simanim are happening, and it could be Puranis may happen, it's not going to affect Klal Yisrael. When we do the Ratzon Shel Makayim, it's unbelievable how relevant this is today. Hashem, like the pasuk says, Kayimar Hashem, right? Like Hashem said, El Derech Hagayim Al Timodu. Don't learn from the ways of the Goyim. Don't be afraid from the Isis Hashemaim. In other words, if you don't learn from the Goyim, there's no reason to be afraid from all these simanim that happen. Why? Right? Only the Goyim should be afraid, but not Klal Yisrael. Why not? Because since we didn't learn from the ways of the Goyim, we have no reason to be afraid. So a tremendous, again, you see, Taka, if we do what we're supposed to do, we have no reason to be afraid from anything that's happening in the world. Tana Rabbanim. So again, so now we're going to continue. We're talking about the Chamalaikis, so we're going to say other things that actually bring about these terrible things. So one, right, there are four Averis that bring about the Cham being like it. Al Av Bezin Shemeis Ve'enin Nisbar Chalacha, right? So you have the Gadol Adar or the Gedolei Adar that die, and people, we don't eulogize them correctly. So that's going to bring about the Cham Aloika, that the Cham is going to be affected. If you have an engaged girl, right? She's obviously now like really engaged, therefore she now lives with another man. And let's say somebody else lives with her. So the Torah tells us that if it's in the city, the woman and the guy who, she's Meishas Ish, so her and the guy both get killed. If it was in the field that we find her, so then only the guy gets killed because Mustamba, we're going to say that he lived with her against her will. She screamed, but nobody heard because she was in the forest, in the field, right? And therefore, the Torah says in Masada, Tzaka, something like that. But nobody heard her. So therefore, we assume that she didn't want it, only he didn't, therefore he gets killed. But now, let's say she's in the city and she screams, right? And nobody helps her. That's a terrible thing, even on the city, right? Because that means that we knew that there was an Asher's issue was getting somebody was living with her against her will, and nobody came to her assistance, to her aid. So something like that's going to bring about Chamaloika. The Mishkav Zachar, also Mishkav Zachar. Also another terrible avera. So, just want to point out over here, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, B'shvil dal devarim, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom. Rashi says, Lo shamati tam b'davar. So I have to look back at the Reb Chaim Kanievsky thing on Maseches Brachos. I'm not sure if the Kinyan HaMesechta or Reb Chaim, but one of them I'm sure mentions this. But again, another place where Rashi says, I don't know the reason, like why these 4 dafka. So Rashi says over here again, another place you see Rashi says, I don't know the reason why these 4, but the Gemara tells us, Chazal tells us that these 4 is what brings about Chamaloika. Just I thought an interesting ha'ara.
I don't think that was the Kinyan HaMesechta. The Kinyan HaMesechta had a different error. I think they quoted a brisa, and the Kinyan HaMesechta said, I don't know where the brisa is.
No, the Kinyan HaMesechta brought like 20 places, and Chaim added another 50.
Right, but what the Kinyan HaMesechta said, the Kinyan HaMesechta says, Rashi goes, I don't know where the...
Rashi Liyadati, Tom, and then the Kinyan HaMesechta says, I'll show you another 20 places where Rashi says this. Reb Chaim added another 50. Okay. Yeah, so something else. Yeah, so I wonder. So one of them, I'm sure, either Reb Kiva Eger or Chaim probably mentioned, this as one of the sources. Another place. Anyway, fine. So notice Rashi over here. Obviously, Rashi never says anything for no reason. By Ma'ayres, Rashi says Yareach v'chaychavim, the moon and the stars. What about the sun? Right, the Ma'ayres is comprised of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Why Rashi leave out the sun? Because if you look back, the right before. It said, Rashi says, okay, if I already know why the Chama gets like it for those 4 things, it must be that these 4 things, Mo'iris must not be including the sun, it must be the moon and the stars. Again, just a nice deek and Rashi, and just see, Rashi points it out, and you notice it. It's just a nice little deek.
Really, what was Pashup Pshat in Shneachin Shifcha Damakecha? Just that 2 brothers were killed at the same time.
Yeah, just to kill. Like in other words, he readily killed 2 brothers, and it was and that's it. The blood was just spilled, and something like that is a terrible thing. Like just that. One person getting killed is one thing, but for 2 brothers to get killed in a city, and nobody's defending them. There's no din v'cheshvan. I guess I assume that's Pshat. So Myris is referring to the moon and the stars, right? Because the one before is referring to the sun. So like in why? Al Kaisei Plaster. So Rashi says over here, it's referring to people who forge documents, and they say that Reb Chaim Kanievsky said to do this and this and this, and it's not true. Right? That's what this Kaisei Plaster means over here. Right? And if you look at Rashi writes, it's not referring to, let's say, he says, Shtaris Mizuyafim Mikhdei Amal, Lashum Daifi al Adam Lichdei B'Shmei, when you write something falsely in somebody's name, but he didn't command. So this is mamish, like, you see today, people, they write that this gadol says to do this, and the gadol never said it. This is mamish kaisei plaster. And for those that testify falsely, so again, we obviously know you're not allowed to testify falsely. And also we know you're not supposed to raise a behemoth dakar to Sruli, it's a gezerah, because behemoth dakars, they go into the fields of their friends, and they then they're basically they steal. So because they're able to go away easily and go into the fields of their friends, you're not supposed to raise a behemoth dakar in Eretz Yisrael. It's Gzeres Chachamim. And finally, about kaitze yilanis tayvos, right? If you cut down good trees, other trees that even though it's yours, right? So you may own these trees, but the fact is that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us trees, and you're telling Hashem, you know what? Even though this tree gives off oranges and it's a great tree, I don't need it. So right, so you're basically kicking Hashem in the face. So something like that, Kodesh Baruch Hu, he causes the ma'ayros, the erech, the techavim, to be likened, to be afflicted, to not to be able to give forth life. Fine. Next, so Shal Bar Devam Nichsei Bali Batim Nimsam Lamalchus. Here we get into Bali Batim. So Rashi on Amid Beis, you'll see the top Rashi says, what are we talking about? Batim? We're talking over here about Ashirim. We're talking about wealthy Bali Batim over here, and these Ashirim end up Nisam Lamalchus. They end up getting handed over to the Malchus, I guess, which means that they end up either getting thrown in jail or killed or whatever. Why? What do they do wrong? So number one is Al Mashe Shtaris Peruim. They after they collect the chayiv, they still keep the shtar. Now, even though they're not going to collect it again because it's obviously that's stealing, so that would be no different than stealing. But he's saying is that you'll use it as leverage later on, because you can show the guy, the borrower, that I still have this shtar, even though you paid it back, and you can try to threaten or intimidate the borrower. The amalve beribis, and also lending beribis. And he says over here, the Marsha, very scary. I think it's the Marsha. Somebody says that, and we're talking about over here somebody, let's say that that is, doesn't, is wants to lend properly. But what happened? Because you're a balabas, and he writes, you're a balabas, and you're not a Talmud Chacham, you don't know how to do a het to iska for something like that. You're going to get they get punished terribly. So you have to be very careful to make sure if you are a balabas and not a Talmud Chacham, and you do lend, to lend it properly het to iska and go to a Talmud Chacham. So here, if you look at the top Rashi number base, he says, these bali batim, they have the ability to protest and to make a macha against those that are doing averis in their generation. Why would anybody listen to a balabas? Right? People are listening because these are wealthy individuals. Because they're wealthy, people are afraid of them. And Rashi says they did not protest. They did not go out and say and go up against the rabble rousers, I think they're called, right? So for that they get punished. And finally, they promised to give staka barabim. In other words, they pledged, they raised their hand $1,000 from after Yaina, and they never end up giving it. So all these balabatim are in big trouble, and that's what it is. And he says, by the way, why balabatim called balabatim? So the Marsha writes, or somebody else writes. So Ben Yoyada, he writes is because all these averis come out because they love money, and if they realize that they were an olam hazeh, right, and money is just so temporary, and olam hazeh so temporary, like we're like a guest, we're like an ireach olam hazeh, we're not a balabas. We would never end up doing. We never be malva beribis. We wouldn't have these fake keep stories that already were paid off. We wouldn't promise and pledge money that we can't give, right? So it's all because we think that we're balabatim, we own, right? We're owners of this world. We're here to stay, and we don't feel like we're archim on this world. That's why these averis come about. That's the Ben Yoyada. Fine. Amar Rav. Let's just finish off over here. The parak. There are 4 reasons why the nichsei balibatim they end up being destroyed. One is al kaishes schar sachir. They don't pay their, when the worker comes to get paid, they hold it back, and they make the guy sweat it. Al oishkei schar sachir. In other words, not only do they make the guy sweat it and they delay it, but they actually steal it. Right? They don't pay the guy. Right? The guy does work for them, they don't pay him. And the fact that they the parik all, right, on Netzabareyan, Chavreyan. I guess that just means that they just like throw off the yoke of Torah. Does he say what that means over there? And he says Valgasus Ruach, and then he's what's our parking all? I assume that just means that they don't care about the Torah, right? Anybody with an art scroll? Parikol just means parikol, right? They just don't do, like, they don't care about the mitzvahs, the Torah, Hashem.
It sounds like maybe it's more of like in Yonei, like chesed, but it could be either one.
Yeah, there's no Rashi.
They think they're too above it. The Tzarchei Tzibor and the regular Hamonam have to take care of that.
That's what it sounds like.
Oh, okay, that's what I got. Oh, that's what it's okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Being the security guard in the shul and putting away the, I'm saying all the things nobody wants to do, they're too big for it.
They're too big for that. Okay, got it. Yep. Okay. Yeah, Gas Ruach and of course an Gaiva. And right, they think they're greater than everybody else because they're rich. The Gas Ruach, he says, and that Gas Ruach, which Rashi says why they have this Gaiva, it's because Bishil Oishram, Rashi says, the last Rashi in the parak, Bishil Oishram, because of their wealth. That's what drives their Gas Ruach. That is Keneged Kum. That basically is Keneged everything. That's that's how bad it is. Oh, finally the Gemara ends off. Avo ba'anovim siv, but people who are modest, who are not Bali Gaiva. So the Tehillim Pasuk says va'anovim yirshu eretz v'yisangu aroiv shalom. Right, that they were going to Yash and Eretz, some Eretz Yisrael, and they're they're going to enjoy aroiv shalom, much shalom, and they will have their possessions. Everything will remain with them. Their possessions will not be destroyed, and they will be zeichet to a good life. So
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Hadron alach hayashan, hadron alach yashan, hadron alach yashan.
Hadron yashan, hadron yashan. Shkoyach.
Just to start the next parak, lulav agazav ayavish pasol. That's it. We just need to start the next parak, not the end.
What do you guys want to do? What do you guys want to do?